I was holding a thin manila envelope when my life divided itself into a before and an after. On the top sheet, a notarized form carried a familiar signature, his. On the second, the same signature belonged to a stranger's husband. For a heartbeat the kitchen went silent enough to hear the clock breathe. I steadied myself on the counter, then read the city seal again, Polk County. Someone else's address. Someone else's vows. That was the instant I knew the ground under our home was paper. My name is Claire Richardson. I teach modern literature at a small community college in Bellevue, Nebraska. I like black coffee, precise sentences, and road trips that smell like rain. Last spring I married Daniel Hayward in a loft venue along the Missouri River with lanterns that bobbed like captive moons. Our friends toasted us with lemonade and jokes about forever. I believed them. The morning after, we drove west until the sky loosened and the plains unfolded like an unlined page. The first weeks were bright. He left notes inside my books, thin post-its pressed between lines of Dickinson and Hughes, promises of pancakes and canyon drives. Then a hush drifted in, fine as dust. Touch became rare, as if affection had been rationed. His phone grew secretive. He adopted new routines, late-night, client calls, weekend, site visits, to Kansas City, a folding distance that felt intentional, like a curtain slowly closing. At first I named it stress. Markets move, I told myself. Projects slip. But the excuses were polished, rehearsed, too neat to be real. The man who once asked for extra time just to linger on a sidewalk began treating our time like a billable hour. By the 6th week I felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome in a house I paid for. The envelope arrived after a Thursday lecture on unreliable narrators. Ironic, my students would have said. Inside were 2 items, a letter addressed to Daniel at a Des Moines mailbox, and a certified copy of a marriage license issued the previous year, with Daniel's signature beside the name of a woman I had never met. The letter thanked him for expediting documents and confirmed an appointment the following Monday to finalize the account access. The realization did not roar, it clicked. The puzzle I had kept scrambled to protect my hope arranged itself, piece by indifferent piece. The early courtship, swift and luminous. His insistence on a prenuptial agreement for both our sakes. The sudden modesty about touch. A new credit card I had not requested. His thrill for paperwork, for stamps, for official language that felt like both shield and sword. I placed the envelope back on the table and watched sunlight crawl across the kitchen tile. My mother's voice visited, when the story refuses to make sense, stop reading the dialogue and study the stage directions. I brewed coffee I did not drink, then drove to the river and let the wind explain stillness. On the way home I bought a small notebook and wrote, "Find facts. Make no accusations. Be patient with your own shock." That night I asked Daniel how the Omaha logistics client was doing. He smiled too quickly and said, "Better." Nearly rapt. He kissed my cheek as an apology for all the silence he had stored between us. I felt the paper weight of that kiss and tucked it somewhere I would not confuse with love. In bed I revised the syllabus. Week 7, Unit on Pattern Recognition. I lay awake and listened to a freight train combine with distant thunder, and I decided to audit my own life with the care I gave to poems, line breaks, repetitions, omissions, tone. Somewhere in the white space the real story waited, patient as a photonegative, asking for light. The next morning I checked our files. The folder labeled taxes was pristine, almost theatrical. Receipts were clipped by size, labels printed, dates aligned like parade soldiers. Too perfect, I thought, the kind of order designed to be admired, not used. In the back of the drawer, tucked behind a stack of warranty cards, I found a key wrapped in masking tape. On the tape he had written a number that could have been a box, a unit, a lock. I took photos, returned everything precisely, and drove to campus. In the office I taught from habit while my attention measured the rhythm of his texts. At 2:11 p.m., a brief message arrived, running late. Don't wait up. I highlighted the sentence in my new notebook as if it were evidence from a lab. Then I called a friend in Des Moines who worked at a bank and asked a favor without context. Could she tell me whether a safe deposit key from a certain branch matched her institution? She paused, then essay. By dusk the wind had shifted. I opened the window and the curtains breathed like they were learning to swim. Daniel came home carrying the smell of a lobby, recycled air and polished stone. He placed his briefcase on the counter and asked if I had eaten. I said yes. He studied my face and seemed relieved not to be required to perform intimacy. We stood together, each waiting for the other to confirm the genre we were living in. Later, while he showered, I held the envelope again and whispered the name of the woman on the license, testing the syllables in the quiet. It felt like touching a cold door handle in a hallway I hadn't noticed before. Behind it, answers. Or more corridors. I began with the small facts, the way you test a bridge by shifting your weight. The key in the drawer fit a safe deposit box at a bank in Des Moines. My friend confirmed the cut pattern over a silent line and then asked if I was all right. I said I would be. After office hours I drove east on I-80 with a thermos of coffee and a playlist of quiet instrumentals, the sky dimming to the color of pencil lead. I told myself I was only going to look. In the lobby I signed the register as myself and watched the guards' eyes do their slow professional tour. The clerk led me to a small room that smelled like paper and metal. When the box slid open, I braced for the breathless thrill of a television reveal. Instead I found meticulousness, photocopies of forms, postage receipts, a plastic sleeve of passport photos, and a stack of envelopes with names I did not recognize written in Daniel's neat, looping hand. On the bottom lay a spiral notebook labeled P. There was not a single love letter. There was not a single photograph of us. I photographed everything quickly, my hands steadier than my heart, returned the files as I found them, and left with the bland smile of someone whose errands had been pleasingly dull. Outside, the wind had teeth. I sat in the car and let the heater build a small summer while the realization grew petals. This was a system. Whatever else Daniel craved, it was not messy. He liked structure, clean outcomes, exits prearranged. Back home I made a list of harmless questions to test against his stories. Which client in Kansas City? How did the presentation go? Why did you change banks? Each answer arrived too evenly, edges sanded, pauses measured. When I teased for specifics he redirected, affectionate but firm, as if guiding a skittish horse back to the safe trail. He cupped my elbow like a caretaker might, a gesture both gentle and managerial. The night I decided to stop performing calm, I drove to Council Bluffs and sat in a diner that served pie as if it were a principal. I opened my notebook and wrote a promise in 3 lines: I will not be baited into a fight. I will not make threats. I will not explain my plan until it is complete. Then I called an attorney in Omaha recommended by a colleague who divorced kindly. Her name was Mariah Boone. Her voice contained the sort of steadiness that makes bridges possible. Before you say anything, she said, know this: uncertainty is exhausting, and exhaustion loves shortcuts. Our job is to outlast it with facts. I told her what I had found, careful to separate what I knew from what I feared. Mariah listened without interrupting. If this is financial impersonation or marriage fraud, she said at last, we will need records, timelines, and lawful documentation. Do not enter boxes that are not yours again. Do copy what relates directly to you. And Claire, eat proper meals. The next week became a choreography of patience. I taught classes, graded essays about unreliable narrators, and traced the logistics of a story that had recast me as a prop. I requested my credit reports, placed freezes, and opened a new account at a credit union that smelled like pencils and laminate. I scanned our prenup with a highlighter, translating its polite clauses into plain speech. I marked the parts that assumed good faith and thought about how easily form can be weaponized against trust. One evening I found Daniel rehearsing sincerity at the mirror, the way you practice a speech. He smoothed his tie, practiced a half-smile that meant, "I'm listening," and lowered his gaze just enough to signal humility without surrender. When he saw me in the doorway, he laughed it off. "Big meeting tomorrow," he said, not quite joking. "Don't want to look like the kid at career day." That same night I tried a new question. "When did you stop believing we were a team?" He looked startled, then touched my shoulder, then let his hand fall, as if the gesture had been vetoed by committee. "You're tired," he said. "We both are. Let's get through this quarter and take a trip." He suggested a cabin by a lake, 2 hours north, where the trees throw their reflections back like a dare. He promised silence and mornings without alarms. It would have sounded lovely if it had been true. I slept with the light on. Morning clarifies. I did not call the woman on the Polk County license right away. I copied her name into my notebook and practiced stillness the way you practice a piano scale, slow, deliberate, patient with the clumsy. Mariah coached me through a checklist. Pull your full credit file. Freeze what can be frozen. Photograph everything you own that bears a serial number. Separate the passwords from the devices. Speak simply and only when necessary. The credit file arrived like a biography written by a committee. Accounts I recognized. One I didn't. A retail card in Wichita, opened 2 months earlier with an address that wasn't ours. I stared at the line until the digits stopped swimming, then called the issuer and repeated a sentence I had highlighted from Mariah's email. "I did not authorize this account. Please send the application file and close it pending dispute." My voice sounded like a teacher taking attendance. I wrote to myself in the margins, "Calm is not denial. Calm is a working tool." On Monday afternoon, between classes, I finally dialed the number for the woman whose name had been paired with Daniel's. She answered on the 4th ring with a voice that held sleep and grit. I introduced myself. There was a long, careful silence, as if someone had opened a door and both of us were deciding whether to step through. "I thought I was the only one," she said at last. Her name was Nora Lamb. She lived in Des Moines, worked as an ultrasound tech at a clinic near the river. They had met at a charity run, she said, and married the previous winter, short ceremony, quiet brunch, no registry. He traveled often. He was better by text than in person. He loved forms. When she asked about a honeymoon, he sent her a subscription to a streaming service, so I wouldn't be bored when he was away. The smallness of that gift landed like a paper cut. We compared timelines like mathematicians auditing a proof. Dates overlapped. Excuses rhymed. She had a prenup too, thin, courteous, reusing some of the same clauses mine did, as if it had been built from a template. "I didn't want to think badly," Nora said. He wore attentiveness like a pressed shirt. She mentioned a P.O. box. She mentioned a co-working space near a light rail stop. She mentioned a habit of pausing before he answered questions, as if checking an inner ledger before speaking. I asked if she was safe. She said yes, then corrected, "Safe enough. No violence, no shouting, just a gloved indifference that made her smaller each week." "I kept shrinking to fit the room he gave me," she said. I wrote the line down, then underlined it twice because I recognized the room. Mariah advised caution about collaboration. "Do not invent a conspiracy with a stranger, however kind," she said. "Share verifiable facts. Share copies, not originals. If you meet, choose public light." We met anyway, on a Saturday morning at a bookstore cafe in Council Bluffs with a children's puppet show rioting cheerfully in the corner. We exchanged folders as if trading paper valentines. Her copy of their license matched my copy of the envelope. 2 narratives, same fountain pen. The relief of not being the only witness was immense and sobering. We weren't special, we were procedural. That knowledge hurt, and also steadied. It moved the story out of the realm of romance and into logistics, where checklists can be drafted and completed. By then I had started to sleep in the guest room, a decision I framed as faculty grading late. Daniel seemed grateful for the alibi. He brought home takeout and placed it at my door the way you deliver a package incorrectly addressed. He apologized for the pace of the quarter and promised spring would be a reset. He committed to a weekend at the lake. He said he would turn his phone face down at dinner. He said all the right sentences with just enough sincerity to sound practiced and just enough warmth. I bought a train ticket to Denver I did not intend to use, just to teach my hands they could make decisions independent of my fear. I read travel blogs at midnight blank of their scenery and full of their verbs. I researched long-stay options in European cities where a teacher could disappear into language and emerge with a new one. Warsaw. Lisbon. Brno. I did not tell anyone, not even Nora. Some plans need the privacy of a seed. The last straw wasn't dramatic. Daniel forwarded a calendar invite titled Final Access Review to a private email I had never given him, but my phone previewed it anyway. The sender was a bank officer in Des Moines. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. The note said, "Bring original ID and marriage certificate." He had placed his documents where trust would lend them credibility. I stared at the screen until the blue light became a lake. Then I added an entry to my own calendar, Tuesday, 10 a.m., call Mariah from a quiet place. Prepare the truth. I chose patience over panic. Paper first, then daylight. Tuesday arrived with a sky that looked ironed. I drove to a public library in Omaha that had quiet rooms you could reserve by the hour and windows that faced a park. At 10 a.m. I called Mariah and read her the email. "Do not go to the bank," she said. "I'll call their legal department and fax a letter stating your position and your pending disputes. Forward me the invite. Then go for a short walk. You need air in your thinking." I forwarded the invite. I sat very still. A child down the hall laughed in a language I didn't recognize, and the sound threaded the room with hope. At 10:26 my phone buzzed with a message from Mariah, bank notified. Meeting suspended. Officer will document attempt. Please send scans of your license and certificate. Then, you did well. 2 words can repair a bridge you didn't know was load-bearing. At 11:10 my phone lit up with Daniel's name. I let it ring out. He texted, "We need to talk." Then, misunderstanding. Then, "Are you okay?" The order of the messages felt like a poem written by someone who had never read one. I walked a loop around the park and watched a group of seniors doing Tai Chi beside the playground, their movements measured and bright. Peace, like any choreography, was the sum of small choices. When I returned home, Daniel was already there, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearms like a stage direction for sincerity. He opened with contrition. "I should have told you about the account. It's a consolidation thing. I didn't want to bother you." He gestured at the kitchen as if it were a jury. "We're a team." "I called the bank," I said quietly. I watched the sentence land and rearrange his next 3. "They canceled the meeting pending legal review." His face did something quick and then corrected. "That's not necessary," he said. "You're overreacting." The word landed with its usual agenda: reduce, dismiss, rename. I felt the familiar urge to explain myself. Instead I let silence do its heavy work. He filled it with an argument shaped like concern. "I've been under pressure," he said. "Deals stack up. I didn't want to scare you." "What scares me," I said, "is being written into a story I don't recognize." We stood there, 2 people in a kitchen that had hosted birthday candles and soups that fix ordinary winters. He tried a new tack: the lake weekend, the turning of phones face down, the promise of a spring reset. He offered small repairs where structure had failed. When he reached for my hand, I let him take only the air around it. That evening I emailed Nora and told her about the cancelled meeting. She replied with a single sentence, "I am breathing properly for the first time in months." The next day she filed 2 reports, one with her bank, one with the State Attorney General's Consumer Division, and forwarded the receipt numbers to Mariah. I copied mine below hers like a quiet duet. Daniel detoured into charm. He cooked. He vacuumed straight lines into the carpet. He apologized with adjectives. At night he lay very still on his side of the bed. The house sounded like a museum after hours, as if the exhibits would rather sleep than be looked at. Mariah's next message contained a simple instruction: if you are ready, we can file. You will cite irreconcilable differences. You will not allege. You will keep your voice clean. You will not warn him in advance. I signed the digital forms and felt a pressure release at the base of my skull I had mistaken for a permanent feature of adulthood. I also booked a one-way ticket to Chicago for a date 6 weeks out with a list of connections across the ocean highlighted in green. The filing triggered a choreography of consequences. Daniel knocked on the guest room door that night like a neighbor. He said he wanted to talk without lawyers. He said he would change passwords back. He said he would close the boxes. He asked if we could reset the narrative, a phrase that made my bones feel like winter. I thanked him for the offers and said no. He moved through denial's familiar stages: surprise, indignation, interpretation, logistics. On a quiet Thursday he slid an envelope across the table: cash, receipts, a list of tasks completed. It read like repentance. It also read like a ledger intended to be photographed. I photographed it. Then I cooked pasta and set 2 bowls on the table and spoke about nothing urgent. Not every honesty must arrive with sirens. I slept, finally, as if a window had opened in the room. I believed the quiet. Spring unspooled with stubborn grace, letting the lawns return to their green story and the cottonwoods remember how to whisper. I moved through endings as if they were rooms that needed sweeping: utilities, insurance, the small subscriptions that stitch a life to a place. I did not rush. Speed felt too much like panic dressed as productivity. Instead I made a calendar and rewarded myself with library afternoons when a square turned a color I liked. I met with the college dean and requested a year's leave. She tilted her head in the way people do when they are calibrating their care. "Take it," she said. "Send a postcard from wherever the sentences improve." I boxed my office into 4 neat stacks and left the plant with a colleague who speaks to leaves better than I do. I posted the car for sale and took the bus for practice. The bus is a splendid humility machine. It teaches you timetables and the art of looking out the window. At night I learned the grammar of elsewhere. I practiced phrases in Polish and Portuguese. I watched videos about transit cards in grocery customs and how to order coffee without sounding like a tourist who needs applause. I read guides that advised packing light but bringing your convictions. I sold the heavy dresser and kept the light desk. I let the sofa go to a family who laughed in 3 languages and promised to watch movies on it with the reverence it deserved. Nora and I exchanged 2 last messages: receipts, reassurance. She enrolled in a night course on accounting because she wanted to see numbers in their unflattering honesty. I found a room in Warsaw above a bakery whose owner answered my inquiry with a cheerful paragraph about morning bread and quiet tenants. The rent was the kind that requires courage but not recklessness. I could teach online seminars from there, right from there, and remember who I was before I auditioned for somebody else's script. Daniel sent 3 emails that were part apology, part weather report. He described stress like barometric pressure, friendships like forecasts, and the future as something that would cooperate if people did. I replied with concise sentences that contained no metaphors at all. The last included the sentence, "Please direct any further communication to my counsel." I pressed send and felt the small, liberating loneliness that follows a clean decision. On my final week in Bellevue I did the ritual tour, the trail by the river where geese stage their loud, ungainly landings, the thrift store that smells like church basements and cotton, the diner with pancakes as big as memory, the bookshop whose owner stacks poetry near the register as if to ambush you with tenderness. I kept a small notebook of gratitude the way you keep a travel log, writing down just enough detail that future me could reconstruct the weather of a day. 2 nights before departure, I walked the pedestrian bridge at dusk and watched the water translate sky into motion. The old me, the one who bent to interpret other people's pauses, stood beside me for a minute and then slipped away without resentment. Fresh wind moved across the river. I decided to believe it. I did not stage a ceremony, but I did give myself an assignment: name 3 things you want to take with you that do not fit in a suitcase. I wrote, steadiness, candid words, unpanicked curiosity. Then I slept, not deeply, but honestly, which is its own kind of rest. On the morning of the train I ate toast with honey from a farm stand that sets out a cash box and trusts you to overpay. I took the small suitcase and the medium one and the backpack that can carry both paper and a day's worth of courage. The neighbor across the street waved from his porch and shouted the blessing Midwesterners use when they cannot think how to say love: travel safe now. I waved back and promised to try. The train slid out of the station with the solemn, generous patience trains possess. Nebraska dipped behind me and Iowa presented itself like chapters you think you know and then read new. My phone hummed with goodbye texts from students and a photo from Nora of a new haircut that made her look like a person who keeps her promises to herself. In the dining car I met a woman traveling to see her sister in Davenport who taught me a card game and told me that reinvention is just another word for practice. By the time the skyline of Chicago found the window, the sun had decided to dramatize all the glass. I booked a room near the station and took a long walk that ended at a lake the size of a lowercase ocean. The water shouldered the light without bragging. People ran, argued softly, proposed, balanced paper cups on railings. The city rehearsed its ordinary miracles and let me stand in the wings. That night, in the small quiet of a hotel room that didn't know me, I wrote a letter to my future landlord in Warsaw and attached scans of a contract that smelled faintly of possibility. I practiced my new neighborhood on a map until the streets felt a little less theoretical. Then I folded my old life into the kind of gratitude that does not require nostalgia to be sincere. Morning arrived with the clean taste of decisive coffee. I checked my passport for the 4th time, counted my pages as if they were small paper lungs, and whispered the names of the cities ahead not as trophies but as invitations. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I promised myself, I would sleep with my mouth open like a child and let someone else be responsible for the engines. I let the morning agree. Airports are the closest thing humans have to portals. One life in, another out. The flight crossed a dark that hummed like a library after closing, then spilled dawn over a country I had never touched. At Chopin Airport the announcements arrived in a rhythm my mouth could not match yet, and the baggage carousel delivered my 2 suitcases with the ceremony of function. I blinked away the cotton of bad sleep, bought a transit card with shaky grammar, and practiced the word Zekuge until it softened from. The room above the bakery was exactly as promised: slanted roofline, window that halved the morning, a table scrubbed to honesty, a narrow wardrobe that asked you to curate. The landlady, Mrs. Jagoda, gave me a tour in Polish and mime. Bread at 6, she said in English finally, smiling in a way that felt like good advice. I set my bags down, opened the window, and let the smell of yeast rehearse its welcome. The first week, I kept errands small: register the temporary address, buy a local SIM, memorize the tram stops to the library with the green lamps and the quiet guards. I mapped the walking path along the Vistula where music leaked from headphones and teenagers argued with exuberant politeness. I found a cafe that wrote the weather on a chalkboard and learned the cashier's name on purpose. In the evenings I taught my online seminars from a desk angle to hide the fact that the world had changed and kept. Homesickness arrived in brief, bright flashes, the shape of a Midwestern sky accidentally drawn into a Warsaw sunset, the exact shade of the college hallway wax in the tiles near the post office, the way a stranger hummed a hymn my grandmother used to play while dusting. I put the moments in a jar labeled evidence of continuity. It helped. On the third Saturday I messaged Nora a photo of the bakery's almond buns with the caption, "Proof of mourning." She replied with a picture of her new ledger and a mug that read yes, and we send each other no wisdom, only weather and small competence. The ordinary can rescue you faster than any sermon. Work found its river. I met other teachers, a poet who translated songs for bars that smelled like orange peel, and a retired engineer who tutored me in declensions as payment for my help with his granddaughter's college essay. I bought a used bicycle whose bell sounded like optimism and learned that riding in snow teaches balance without asking permission. I joined a reading group that tolerated my accent and loved my questions. The city made room as if expanding a pocket. Daniel wrote once more, through counsel, about logistics that no longer attached to my days. I felt nothing dramatic. Relief had moved from fireworks to central heating, steady, quiet, undeniable. When the formalities ended, I took the documents to the river and did not perform a ritual. I simply folded them into a file, walked home, and made soup. Some victories prefer understatement. In February I took a train to Gdansk because the name had lived in my mouth since a history class and I wanted to greet it. I stood by the water and watched cranes bow to ships, and I thanked every version of myself who had walked, signed, waited, packed, boarded. I understood that the miracle was not distance but direction. Letters came from students, updates about transfers, notes about jobs, a photo of a shelf where my old plant had sprouted an unnecessary number of leaves. The dean sent an email, gentle and brief, "Whenever you're ready, the door understands hinges." I wrote back that I was teaching from here for now, that the tram had become a classroom, that literature travels well. One evening in late winter, snow rehearsed itself outside the window while the bakery clattered below. I opened the notebook I had carried from Nebraska and turned to the first page where I had written my early plan: find facts. Make no accusations. Be patient with your own shock. I added 3 new lines beneath it: choose the door that enlarges you. Believe the evidence of kindness. Practice the language of next. There are days I am still lonely in a way that feels pure, like cold air in the lungs. But the loneliness no longer asks me to shrink. It invites me to pay attention. On Tuesdays I buy tulips from a vendor who wraps them in paper and tells me the weather's secrets. On Thursdays I ride the tram to a library where the lamps are patient and the chairs know how to hold you. On Sundays I call my mother and we compare soups. Sometimes I walk the Vistula at dusk and imagine the pedestrian bridge between Nebraska and Iowa, and for a moment the rivers meet. I think of the envelope on the kitchen table in a house I no longer rent, and the person I was who steadied herself against a counter and decided to learn the truth. She is not brave because she fled. She is brave because she stayed long enough to name what was happening and then left without a performance. I kept walking.